Good afternoon. My name is Larry Smoot Jr., and I'm the author of the C Trilogy series of books. The first is the Centennial 2029. The second is the Chronicles of His Story. The third is the Comforter and Spirit of Truth. Now, I also produced a stage play, Family Secrets, and filmed a movie which is yet to be named and is in the editing stages, due out by the end of summer 2026. Both the movie and the stage play were adaptations of Book One, the Centennial 29. That book took place in the year 2029 around the 100th celebration of the Smoot Family Reunion, which is why we're here today, to highlight the uniqueness of an African American family that has come together every year since the Great Depression of 1929, which only happened to be a coincidence and not a catalyst for the reunion. For a post-emancipated Black family in the Jim Crow South of the 1920s, depression was a way of life, yet with a steady beat. Have not our weary feet. We have come to a place where our fathers and grandfathers and Big Mama not only sighed, but flourished. As a fourth generation Smoot, I can tell you our history. Milton Smoot was born a slave in Tazewell, Virginia in 1842. In 1863, Milton married Sarah. In 1871, Milton, Sarah, and their two sons, Joe and Isaac, moved to the newly formed state of West Virginia and settled in Boone County. Milton was talented and started a sawmill where he sold timber all the way from Madison to St. Albans by floating the wood down the Little Cold River. That allowed him to buy 300 acres of land, and that's where he raised his then 9 children. They were Joe, Isaac, John Reese, Henry Matt, Andrew Jefferson, Elbert, Thomas Richard, Fanny, and Dora. In 1929, the family was scattered all over the country, and some of them weren't even getting along with each other. John Reese went to his older brother Joe and said that we need to get the whole family back together. That's when they had their first family reunion in 1929. John Reese, who was a minister, used the parables of 2 is greater than 1 found in Ecclesiastes. He had 9 sticks on the table, and he said each stick represents one of the siblings. Individually, a stick can be broken. Even if you had 2 or 3 of those sticks put together, they can be broken. If all 9 sticks stood together, it would form a bond that no man can break. That's where we get our tagline of strength, there's strength in unity, and the logo of 2 fists holding a bundle of sticks together. On the cover of Book One, the Centennial 29, you will see a picture of that first reunion back in 1929. If it's not obvious, I love my family history. So much so that I decided to do an interview of the elders a couple years ago. At the time, I had the perfect couple. Ronald Smoot, who's our oldest male, and Carolyn Jean Matthews, who is our oldest female, both born in the year 1929 and were present at the very first reunion. Although Carolyn Jean Matthews was born in October, she was in the womb at the time while Ronald was born in February, so he was there. As fate would have it, procrastination got the best of me, and they are no longer available. They are both in good spirits, but they are technically in hospice care. So today, I have with me my family historians, Doug Smoot and Joseph Saunders. My first question to the both of you all is, coming down here, the very first thing you see every year that you come down is you look at the memorial board and see if there's any new names on there, but not necessarily new names. I just enjoy looking at the bold names there, the founding fathers, and to me, they're like rock stars. Did either of you two have an opportunity to know of, meet any of the elders or founding fathers of the reunion?
Yes, I met several of them.
Oh, okay.
Yes, after thinking about it, I made a list of them,
Okay.
and the more I listed, the more I remembered.
Okay.
For example, the first founder was J.W. Smoot, J.W. and Nora Smoot, and Nora was my grandmother, and I knew her very well. I grew up across the lane, we call it the lane, from my grandmother, Nora Smoot. And I knew her all the way up till she passed away in 1968. The next founder that I knew was Isaac Smoot. I knew Isaac Smoot. He lived down in Madison. And sometimes we would go to Sunday school. My father would send him some things. And I can describe him. He was a distinguished looking guy. He was short, slightly built, and he wore wire round glasses, small lenses. And that always stood out. And he had been a postman for the city of Madison. That was one of his jobs.
Okay.
The next person that I knew, the founder, was Thomas R. Smoot and Lula Smoot. And Thomas was famous for his fiddling and also calling those dances that they did back then. He was well known, and people sought him all over southern West Virginia to come and call those square dances.
Wow.
He had a very rhythmic voice, a very nice baritone voice, and his wife was Lula Smoot. And I can remember she would come to every reunion, and she would stand up when they were have people to stand up and make some type of remark. She would stand up and talk about how proud she was to be a Smoot. Very, very proud to be a Smoot. The next founder that I knew and met was Albert and Ella Smoot. Albert Smoot, he was a construction worker, a builder, and he lived in downtown Madison. But when I was very young, they moved to Burlington, Ohio. But I can remember very well my father and my older brother walking to his home in Madison to watch the Friday night fights. That was popular back then. That was very popular sport. Boxing was big back then because of people like Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano, Sugar Ray Robinson, and all of those guys. And Aunt Ella would always, I would be anxious to get there because she would always have a lot of refreshments. And we would just eat all evening long. And I remember that so very, very well. I was sorry to see them leave Madison to go to live in Burlington, Ohio. I think the reason why they moved is because they had a daughter that lived in Burlington. All right, the next person that I knew was Frances Smoot. Her husband's initials were JR or something like that. I can't remember, but it's on the board. We called her Auntie. Everybody called her Auntie. She was Milton's, one of his youngest daughters, and she married this guy with the last name of Slater. I never met him. But Aunt Frances was over the mission in the AME church down in Madison. And in her last few years, she lived with my grandmother across from where we're sitting now. She stayed with her and until she passed away. Okay, so that concludes the people that I knew, or the founders that I knew. I'm glad you asked that question.
I'm
It brought back a whole lot of memories.
my pleasure. I think, Gus, you said you didn't recall
No,
any of the founders.
no, due to my age, I didn't know any.
Okay, and with TR
Right.
was your grandfather, right, or great grandfather, correct?
And Lula was your great grandmother.
Who I know that died in 1966. They lived at 266 Boone Avenue, and I actually have copies of her obituary for family members to see if they would like to gain more information.
Okay, for the both of you, what are your earliest recollections of the reunion or fondest memories?
So, if you don't mind, Doug, I'd like to go first on that one.
You got it.
Okay. So, my fondest memory is being fortunate enough to live right down the road, less than a quarter mile from the reunion. And every second weekend in August was a festive time because as a young lad growing up from 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, we would hear the rumblings coming weeks ahead of time. The reunion is getting ready to take place. The reunion is getting ready to take place. And, we'd be excited. So we would stand, before the reunion would even start, we would stand on the riverbank and watch the cars come up the road. And it would be such a festive time, be like, wow, look at that car. One day I'm going to have a car just like that one because the Smoots were very, very successful people. And we would just be amazed at the type of people, the people they were, the vehicles that would come. And, it was just a great weekend starting from Friday evening all the way on Saturday up to Sunday, which was the formal program. And it was always the greatest time to see the people that you haven't seen all year. Most of the family, and there's a bunch of us, you don't see them during Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, or anything else. But everybody comes in for the reunion, and Madison actually comes alive during that time. And not only was it great for the Smoot Family Reunion, but it was great for the entire town of Madison, West Virginia, and Boone County. I mean, it was just a great, great time. So lots of great memories. I would be here forever and ever.
All righty.
And it was economically progressive for the town of Madison because all of we had a motel in Danville, which was filled up with people coming to the reunion. We filled up the one in Madison. Actually, there was two in Madison. And we filled up the one on Corridor G in Charleston. And we had quite a few of them that went to the Holiday Inn downtown Charleston.
Okay.
Yes. So we had a business and labor editor from the Charleston Gazette. Charleston Gazette was the biggest newspaper in West Virginia. It was called the state newspaper. And Mr. Peaks was the editor. And Mr. Peaks wrote about how the Smoots reunion helped to bring about to build the economy here in West Virginia. And he happened to become so interested in the Smoot reunion that he wrote 4 separate articles about the Smoot reunion. The first one was in 1973. And then he wrote another one a few years later. And he had them spaced out all the way up to about 2004. And he was also one of our guest speakers here one time. Mr. Peaks lived to be about 95 years old, and he was one of the most respected business and labor editors in the state of West Virginia. Now, Another thing that I remember very, very well, I was at this reunion and they called out people who were here from other places. And we had people from 12 different states, all the way from California to New York, down to Florida, all the way up to Minnesota. And we had a lady who you mentioned a few minutes ago, Carolyn Matthews. Mm-hmm. She was here from China because she was teaching English over there. I can't remember the city, but she was here that day. She had been in China. And a guy, one of our relatives married a Japanese lady, and he came in for the reunion, brought her here, and from Japan. And then another relative happened to be on vacation in England, and he came in for the reunion. So here we had people from 12 different states and 3 countries. That was around 1982, 82, 83, somewhere in there. Now, another big memory was the dedication of the first pavilion. It was dedicated on a Saturday, and of course the mayor was here. We had newspapers from Madison, and of course the Charleston Gazette and Daily Mail were here. And we had the Logan Banner from Logan, West Virginia. We had the mayor from Madison to cut the ribbon. Also, later on in the program, he didn't make it on time, was the Secretary of State. He came for the ribbon cutting. And I can remember my grandmother. She was the last founder that was still alive from my memory. I can't remember any others being here at that time. And she was so happy. She was sitting on the front row, and she was just, she was happy. You could just tell that was one of the greatest events in her life, being a founder. And it was on her and her husband's property, right. Joe and Nora Smoot's property, where it is held now, on their property. Yes.
And if I could kind of segue off of that just a little bit. So all of the great people that Doug just mentioned that came to this reunion, as a young man as well, I remember, you know, we wasn't the richest. Of course, we wasn't the poorest, but we was pretty close. But the reunion actually provided an opportunity. And there's an old saying that says, education is the key to success. And with all the people that he mentioned, that was actually an opportunity. I remember as a young man being 8 years old, 9 years old, and you could look up to those people and they would talk to you and they would tell you how they obtained their success, what they had to do. And, you know, they would actually give you a roadmap to follow, which I credit to a lot of the success that I have today, is I credit from the Smoot Family Reunion. And not only did you have role models and mentors, but I actually received one of the scholarships. And the scholarship was a gift to the students who went to the Smoot Family Reunion. And today, young kids will look at those as just a gift, but that actually gave me the ability to buy my books while going to college, and able me to actually make it through college. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to give a lot of my success for what I have today is from the individuals who were at this very reunion.
That was a Smoot Scholarship, which is still given out each year. Yes. And Gus, that reminds me of something. The very last election that we had of officers, every one of the officers, I understand, received a Smoot Scholarship.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And every officer was a college graduate. Every one of our officers. And, you know, they all were part of the Smoot Scholarship. Yes, indeed. I remember when Gus was president for almost 8 years. I was his treasurer, And Gus, I counted it up. Gus gave away 35 scholarships during his tenure. 35 Smoot scholarships. Yes, indeed.
All righty, great information. I appreciate that. Now I'm going to ask you a political question. As the current president of the reunion, I have to govern over the state of the family and do what I think is best for the family at whole. In 1979, we celebrated our 50th reunion, and we had over 400 family members present. 2 years ago, we celebrated our 95th reunion, and we had less than half as many family members present. This will be our 97th reunion, which puts us 1 year closer to 100. How would you feel about the reunion moving around to other locations to drum up more support and interest from the family members abroad? And that's probably after the 100, because we can't plan that right now, but we're at 97. Would the 101st reunion being held in Atlanta be a major issue in your opinion? Either of you.
Gus, go ahead.
Well, the family, of course, I'm all about change. In order to grow and develop further, you actually need change. But convincing some of our stakeholders, I might call them, some of the stakeholders that we have to move from this location, it's going to be a difficult challenge. But in order to grow and develop, we're going to have to do things different. Because, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result. Well, we've then kind of got landlocked, and we've got to do different things. Before that would happen, I'd like to see us move across the river and maybe do that. But, as a test, I would like to see maybe not so much the reunion weekend, but maybe 2 reunions. Let's try that cruise ship, the family reunion cruise ship, and let's see how it goes. And if it works, and change is giving us a better environment and more people and greater participation, I would support it totally 100%.
Great idea, great idea.
The reason why I asked Gus to speak on that is because he has talked about this before to a lot of people. And like he said, it's a great challenge because it's about 50-50 from what I remember.
Right.
And he tried to sell it. Gus is a great salesperson, but he tried the whole 7.5 years that he was president to do that and other things. And he got a lot of other things done that had never been done before. For example, canoeing on the Pond Fork River. That was one of the big events that everyone loved. And also visiting the home place of Milton and Sarah Smoot on a Saturday morning. Those were, and then he brought in a lot of other things. It doesn't come to my mind right now. What was that rubber ducky thing?
Rubber ducky race.
Yes. He did that on the water out here. All the kids loved it. He brought in so many things for the kids. And that was one of the ways that he tried to improve the attendance by bringing in young people. I remember you brought in the bouncy houses for young people. And that we had a lot of young folks attending, and that worked. But Gus has tried to work with, during his time, and I know that Larry Jr. is going to do the same, try to go to different places with this, enjoy other places. Yeah.
Well, the idea of a cruise or a boat ride, that would be excellent. An excellent idea. And I guess it doesn't have to take place and replace a reunion. It can be in addition to. So maybe that is something that we need to put on our docket for the coming years.
Let me add to what Doug was just saying. I think one of the most successful times that we had is when his brother Rodney was president. He used to do the boat ride on the Kanawha River.
Yes.
And that is when we had our biggest reunions you know, the activity didn't take place here at the pavilion, but it actually took place on the Canal River. I think it was the PA Denny was what it was called. But that sold out for like 3, maybe 5 years in a
Yes.
row. And that was a key to success because once you got everybody here on Friday, then they was here for the rest of the weekend. And then I think another one Doug mentioned is when we went to Tazewell County, Virginia, to visit the home place of Milton and Sarah Smoot. We actually had two, maybe 3 van loads of people that were sold out. In addition to that, I think we had like 15 people following us, but it actually brings up and it enhanced the participation that we had for the weekend. So other ideas, thinking outside the box, because we can't keep doing the same thing and
Right, right.
expect better results. I mean, it just kind of makes things stagnant. But let me add to that just a little bit further. So I think the key to success for the Smoot Family Reunion is the resources that we have. And to expand on that just a little bit, there's a thing called dynamic capabilities with sustained competitive advantage. I know I said a lot, and everybody's like, well, what does that mean? Dynamic capabilities with sustained competitive advantage is we need to have things that you can't replicate. Because the reason that the canoe race the canoes were so successful is because you can't go to Charleston and any place else and ride the canoe on the Little Cold River. So that was one of the things that we had that would kind of bring people in. Another thing, like when Rodney did the boat ride on the PA Denny, you can't replicate that in any place else. And then going back to the home place was another thing. So to take a long sentence and make it a short one is in order to bring in participation and dynamic capabilities, we have to use the resources that we have here. And it has to be something that you can't buy at Walmart. Because anything that you can buy at Walmart, I'm going to buy it in Cincinnati or Columbus and Cleveland, and I'm not coming to West Virginia. So it's got to be some of the resources. We have to enhance the resources that we have here.
Yes, I do remember the riverboat in particular, and I did try to get a riverboat ride the last couple of years. It's just that the Charleston riverboat, whatever, is not available. It moved away. It moved to, so the closest riverboat, we have to get it from Cincinnati and have it get here before we can do that. So that may not be cost effective. But Doug, you said you may have something else?
We're talking about resources. One of the great resources in West Virginia for this type for reunions would be the West Virginia Culture and History Department, to work with them because they love to do this type of thing. As a matter of fact, I've told Gus about this, they have contacted the reunion in the past and asked if they could be part of it. They would like to sponsor it. But what they wanted to do, they wanted to kind of take over the activities and actually maybe put it in their name or whatever. And some people didn't quite approve of that at that particular time. But that was probably 15 years ago.
Okay, wow, that's interesting. As president, I wouldn't have a problem with if you want to sponsor anything, especially if it's going to get more folks here. You know, before we move on, one last thing I remember that's interesting. I remember working about 30 years ago. I remember saying that I'm going to my reunion in West Virginia, and my coworker was like, "Oh man, are you going whitewater rafting or mountain biking or anything like that?" I was like, no, I'm going to go see Grandma. What do you mean whitewater rafting and mountain biking? And that's when I realized that a lot of folks come to West Virginia for their resources that they have. It may not be in Boone County, but we need to get outside of Boone County, whether it's a Thursday water ride down the New River, whether it's mountain biking, whether it's whatever it may be. But we need to utilize West Virginia, in my opinion, to get more participation, and it may have to be more than a weekend. You're not going to get it done on a Friday and a Saturday, Sunday. You may have to come down there for a week. So we will keep that in mind.
The city of Madison would be another good resource. They know that this event has been going on for many, many years. And I think that they would probably list it as one of the major events of the town and city and county of West Virginia.
I would not be surprised.
Yes. And they would advertise it in such a manner.
Mm-hmm. All right, this one's for Gus in particular because I know he has the answer. There's rumors of the reunion only missing 1 year, whether it was due to a pandemic or a war. And I understand cousin Ronald clarified the rumors here recently. What was the response?
That is, I actually had a conversation with cousin Ronald Smoot, who happens to be one of the oldest people still living today that was at the reunion at the time. And his memory was that people gave the rumor that we missed one reunion because of the pandemic. But he actually expanded on that and went a little bit further and said it's because people couldn't afford to come because that was during an economical time where they had rations and you only had so many stamps to get so much gas, and people couldn't take them stamps and come to the reunion because they had to have them stamps to actually get back and forth to work in order to maintain their families and, for the survival rate of their families. So the reason that I heard, to sum that up, the reason that I heard that it wasn't because of the pandemic, it's because people couldn't afford to come.
Okay. Well, there you have it. And cousin Ronald would know. All right, last question. What, in your opinion, needs to be done now to make the 100th Smoot reunion the greatest and most represented reunion possible? Either of you.
Set a goal to raise thousands of dollars, let's say 50,000, for example, and have a lot of fundraisers and raise the money so that you can, fund certain activities that you want to have, or maybe certain speakers that you would like to have present.
So I'm in agreement with Doug as well, but I think every member of this family reunion and every member's spouse, every member's child, every member's cousin, every member's second cousin needs to become an ambassador for the Smoot Family Reunion. I've been a couple places in the last couple weeks, even as last weekend. I'm actively recruiting people, and I'm actually promoting the 100th reunion, and we haven't got to the 100th yet. But I'm promoting it. It has to be, we have to have an all-out media blitz. We have to have a campaign. Yes. We have to have mailings. We need to come up with crews for people to get on the phone. Hey, are you coming to the reunion? Can I get a commitment? Okay. Well, with that commitment, like Doug said, will you go ahead and pay for that in advance? Because if people spend their money now, they coming. But we're just not going to take the yes or no or maybe or whatever. But there needs to be an all-out media blitz because, it would be an absolute shame. The ancestors in 1929 who put this reunion together, who kept it together for all these years, and then people just get lazy and not value the reunion as they should. We got to put the Smoot back in history, and everybody's got to come on board. They've got to get on this Smoot train that's running 100 miles an hour. They've got to jump on board and they've got to latch onto it. And they've just got to be great ambassadors. It's not a job that one person can't do. It's a job the entire family has to do.
Amen.
Amen.
And I agree with both sentiments. I will let it be known that one of the things that I did as I started president is I thought it was ridiculous that we would have a reunion that's been going on for 95 or so years. And this is probably the only reunion that I know of that does not charge anything to attend. So I started the process of having a voluntary donation of a certain amount for whomever thinks it's appropriate to pay, just to get the family used to spending money, because one thing that we do know is it's going to take dollars, and it's going to take thousands of dollars. And to expect anything to be great and be free is just not realistic in this day and age. So I will not get on my high horse about that. I will leave that alone and leave that there. I did mention earlier that our eldest members were Ronald Smoot and Carolyn Jean Matthews, the oldest female. I was able to speak with her yesterday, and I told her I would love to convey her thoughts on some of the questions I asked today. The first of which is I asked her if she knew any of the founding fathers, and she said that she didn't recall any. She is a grandchild of Henry Matt Smoot, and I believe Rosa is his wife? I don't recall, but that was her grandfather and grandmother. She didn't remember Matt as much because at the time that they were separated, so she pretty much only saw him in Madison, but she had never lived in Madison. And she did say her grandmother helped raise her. I believe they were raised in Institute, if I'm not mistaken. But she remembers her grandma, but not her grandfather as much, nor any other memories, any other of the founders. I asked her about her memories of the reunion, and she said one thing that stood out with her was the fact that everybody brought something to the reunion for people to eat. And that was before we built this current pavilion that has a kitchen. And now we either make the food ourselves, or the reunion is responsible for providing the food, or we're catering the food in. So those were key thoughts that she brought up. And I thought it was interesting to mention that. And that did bring up a memory of mine, or a rumor or question of mine, and that is why do we have it the second Sunday in August? And I always thought it was primarily because of the harvest, and food was more plentiful then during that time. But in actuality, she says that may be the case, but she thought it was more in line with the school year. We had a number of educators in our family, and August was a more convenient time because it was the end of summer, and our educators were able to get their profession in order. So, and with that, I would like to say thank you first of all, to Doug and Gus for joining me and being here to share, and thank you for your time.
Glad to be here.
I appreciate that. Goodbye. And now we have a special presentation of the Smoot family history as presented via the Underground Railroad with Joseph Saunders.
Greetings to everyone. My name is Joseph Gus Saunders, former president of the Smoot Family Reunion. And today I would like to discuss with you some of the hypotheses of Milton Smoot and how he navigated the plight to the Underground Railroad. So behind me, I have a quilt, a very special quilt, very, very special quilt to this family that was actually pieced together by my sister, Lenora Saunders. She was with a group called the Quilting Queens in Cleveland, Ohio, and together they put this quilt together, and very special to this family. So not only everybody knows how to read it, so I'm going to try to do my best to educate it on you this morning. So the quilt is part of the history from a lady by the name of Miss Odella in Charleston, South Carolina. And they put together some pieces of a quilt to tell you how to navigate the Underground Railroad. Now, I have to be upfront and tell you that this theory has been challenged by a few, but not many, that are the theories accurate. So the challenge that people gave was, is the quilt accurate? And if not, why is it not accurate? So what they were trying to say is the quilt is not accurate because it's not written down. So I call that nonsense, because back in those days, in the late 1800s and 1850s, 1860s, when you were going through the Underground Railroad, we all know that the punishment for being able to read and write was death. So you're not going to be able to find any writings on the theory of the Underground Railroad. But what we do have is we have a group we call the griot. And what proves the theory correct is that griot tells the story over and over and over again, and it's told so many times. Thus, scholars have maintained with the telling of the story that the story is true and accurate. So how do you check that to make sure that the griot were actually being accurate? So you hear the story over and over and many, many times. So we have a thing called the Green Book. And the Green Book told people when they traveled America back during the early times, early 1900s, when you traveled the country, you had the Green Book that told you the route to take, where you could stay, where it wasn't, where you couldn't stay, and the places you could stay for the night, which is pretty much the same theory that we used in the Railroad in navigating the Underground Railroad. So from there, that's a small enough history to kind of get you started. What I'd like to talk about today is the Underground Railroad and how we use that theory on how Milton Smoot traveled from Tazewell County, Virginia to Boone County, West Virginia, the spot that we're standing today. So the story begins back in the 1860s, right prior to the Civil War, prior to the first cannonball being fired that actually fought off the Civil War. So researchers told us in Tazewell County, Virginia, that Milton Smoot lived in Tazewell County, Virginia, and we were actually able to track the plantation he was on, and it was a plantation called Piney Cove. So how do we know that it was Piney Cove? Well, research tells us in Tazewell County, Virginia, during that time, that there was a very, very few number of slaves. In the town, there were fewer than 8% of people who were the slaves, and all of them lived on Piney Cove. So that theory pretty much tells us where Milton came from. So I mentioned Piney Cove to start the story of the Underground Railroad. So if you look behind me, and I'll use this pointer as a reference. So the first one you see is called the monkey wrench. And when Milton was on Piney Cove, the monkey wrench told you to get your tools together, that we're going to be traveling the Underground Railroad pretty soon, because they had to escape, because if they didn't, the punishment would have been horrible, horrible death. They did such things to the slaves, such as the women, they used them for medical experiments. They would do gynecology without any anesthesia. And the men, they would take them and they would use them. They did brutal things to actually kill the people. So the monkey wrench actually tells you, get your tools together. We're going to be traveling out tonight, or we're going to be going. And the second one is what you call the wagon wheel. And there's actually two of those. One is the wagon wheel, and the second is what you call the carpenter's wheel. And when you saw the wagon wheel or the carpenter's wheel, that told you that we were going to be leaving tonight. So back in those days, we didn't have radio, we didn't have telephone, we didn't have email, we didn't have any of the modern fixtures that we have today. So how did the slaves communicate with each other? They communicated through song. And there's an old Negro spiritual talk that says, can we break bread on our knees, O Lord? Can we break bread on our knees? As I raise my knees to the rising sun, O Lord, have mercy on me. And that's how the slaves would pass the message to watch out for the quilt code on the Underground Railroad. So when you heard that song, that told you that another quilt was going to come up. So the first one was the monkey wrench. The second one is what we call the wagon wheel. And the wagon wheel, which means we're going to be leaving tonight. And so that night, which would usually be on a holiday, preferably a time during Christmas, or a time during a holiday where the slave master would get drunk and you would have 4 or 5 days to travel without anybody knowing what you were doing. So as you got onto the Underground Railroad, it's not just something that you did. You had to be mentally ready, you had to be physically ready, and you had to be spiritually ready, because once you got out there was no coming back. Once you got out there, the punishment for coming back and escaping would be death, and they would make an example against you. So as you were traveling the Underground Railroad, the first place that you did, you would come to the next phase, which would be called the Bear Claw. And as you got to the Bear Claw, the reason for the Claw, as you were traveling, you would follow the route, and it would tell you, follow the path of the bear, go into the woods, because where the bear goes, you can usually find fresh water, you can find berries, you can find fruit, and you can find food. Where the slave master wasn't likely to follow you during the bear tracks, because he wouldn't go there because of the bear. So it goes back to, again, you had to be mentally and physically and spiritually ready. And another group that you would find during the route of the Underground Railroad, you would find the Indians. And part of our history tells us that when Milton Smoot was traveling the Underground Railroad, he was married to a woman by the name of Sarah Chapman, who we can actually trace back and determine to be an Indian. So he actually, as you followed the bear tracks, that got you further away from the plantation. And the next quilt that you would come upon would be what you call the basket. And the basket to these days is kind of like a hotel, the Hilton, Red Roof Inn, or something like that. You could stop long enough on the basket to get you, to get a little bit of rest, but you had to keep going, because you had to keep in mind, once they determined that you had done escaped, then you had to keep moving because they were trying to capture you. And as you got through with the basket, the next phase you came to is what you call the crossroads, which is the pattern behind me now, is the crossroads. And it's similar to the signs, like if you're traveling to West Virginia from, let's say, Cleveland, Ohio, to Madison, West Virginia, you would see the signs that said Interstate 79, Interstate 64, 119 to Madison, West Virginia. You didn't have those patterns back then, so you would actually have the crossroads pointing into the direction, which means is where you should go, which usually was in a northerly direction to keep you traveling the path of the Underground Railroad. After you went through the Underground Railroad a little further, the next one that you ran into would be what you call the log cabin. The log cabin you could actually go into, and you could actually have rest for the night. And while you're in the log cabin, you could stay for the night. But how did you know that you can go into that particular cabin? As you're traveling the Underground Railroad, that quilt pattern would have been hanging out on the fence post. And there were certain signs that you looked for. One, the quilt was on the fence post. Two, when you looked at the cabin, you would have a lone rocking chair standing on the porch by itself. That would be two patterns that you would know that you could have safety. But if you looked at all those and somebody came out, maybe a person who actually was in the house and worked in the house, and they put a red dot in the middle of the pattern, that would tell you that there's problems with coming to that cabin, that you're going to probably some harm is going to happen to you. So you can stay at the cabin, rest up, get your feet healthy again, because you probably had bruises on your feet, and you need to get healthy as you travel the path. So once you left the Underground Railroad, the next one you came to is called the shoe fly. And the shoe fly told you, take off them old slave clothing and try to find you some different clothing to try to blend into, so you could look more like people who were normalized in normalized society, and you wouldn't stick out so much. So usually you got those not by shopping at any local department store, but you got them by stealing them off of somebody's clothesline, because the people who were worked in the house Negro would purposely put them on the line so you could get those clothes and you could change and get rid of your old slave clothing. The next one is called the bow tie. And the bow tie tells you, once you change your clothing, you've made it far enough up north to where you could actually take a bride at this point. You could actually get married, you could have children, but you wasn't safe, but you could actually put on the bow tie or dress up to the point where you could have a bride. Now the bow tie actually had a different meanings One of it, if you think of the pattern of the bow tie, it's actually a bow tie. But if you actually took that pattern and you turn it upside down, it's actually what you call an hourglass. And the hourglass says that you actually have so many hours to get you because people are coming and you need to hurry up and get away from that, get away from them premises and continue following the Underground Railroad, which he did. So as he traveled further along the Underground Railroad, not all the travel was using by feet or an ox cart or something like that. You actually traveled by boat. So the next sign that you would see would be the boat. And as you traveled the boat, as you would keep going, that was your method of safety. Usually you would sneak onto the boat and you just didn't pay fees, but you would sneak onto the boat and you would hide in the commodities that they had, and you would just keep traveling that way. So once you got off the boat, and as you traveled a little bit further, how did you know that you were going north? So animals tell us a lot. Geese tells us a lot. The birds tells us a lot, and even animals tells us a lot. So as you're traveling, you would watch up in the sky, and you would see the birds traveling north. So that would tell you to walk in a northerly direction, and you were traveling north to get to the Underground Railroad. So as you travel north, you would be getting closer to the north where you were going to. You would see a sign called the Drunkard's Path. And the Drunkard's Path would tell you, don't walk in a straight direction, walk in a zigzag pattern because people were trying to capture you and take you back to the plantation that you came from. And then as you traveled the Drunkard's Path, usually you would see another boat, and that would take you across the Ohio River because our history tells us that Milton Smoot traveled from Tazewell County, Virginia, up to Boone County, West Virginia, and prior to that, to get all the way to freedom, you crossed into Ohio, and total freedom is you traveled into Canada from Ohio. And then after that, you saw the North Star, and that's where you had complete freedom. And that's the plight of the Underground Railroad as the Smoot family history is told.